May peace and blessings be upon you all. I'm very grateful and honored to be in this space and to be with all of you for a second day, and more humbled and honored to be on the stage with Tori and teachers and luminary leaders in the Muslim American community, some of the people that are the most highly esteemed in our community. So I want you to know whose space you are sharing. So I'm grateful to be here. So I'm not a theologian or a scholar, as I told you yesterday, so I want to talk to you as an American Muslim, as an activist, and someone who works every single day in Muslim communities across the country, but more specifically in New York City. And I want to talk to you about now and what Islamophobia actually looks like, what Islamophobia means, and how it impacts your Muslim neighbors, your Muslim teachers, doctors, social workers, cab drivers, restaurant workers, Muslim children and school children across the country. You know, we're living in very crazy times, and I think that it's important to hear the voices of those in the communities that are most directly impacted. And while I will share with you some difficult things, I will say for myself and for my Muslim sister and brother who are on the stage that we still are and will always be unapologetically Muslim in the United States of America. And I dare, thank you. And I personally have been reflecting a lot lately on kind of the rhetoric and the things that are happening around us, especially in the context of this election. And what's been interesting to me is I've been taunted by a lot of people. About a year ago, I said, look, everybody needs to wake up. This is a dangerous rhetoric. We've seen it happen in other places before, and we can't just sit back and say, oh, don't worry about it, it's gonna be all right. And people said, do you think we in the United States of America will allow a man like this lead our country? Linda, you're crazy, like this is, what's wrong with you? I said, okay. So I was silenced up until about a few weeks ago, and I emerged again very confident to say, I told you so. And what was interesting for me is the past few months, people heard things like, we're going to register the Muslims in a database. And people were outraged. Not in our country, we would never do that. We're not gonna allow that to happen. Ban Muslims from coming to our country. Maybe we'll let in the Christian refugees, but not the Muslim ones. People said, Linda, that's just all talk. That's not something we do here in this country. We'll never allow that to happen. Patrol Muslim neighborhoods. What Muslim neighborhoods? Our Muslim neighbors live in all cities across the country. We don't patrol neighborhoods based on people's faith. We just don't do that in this country. Linda, we're never gonna let that happen. And I was watching people, and I was feeling good that people were outraged. I wanted to see the outrage, but I was waiting for the punchline, right? I was waiting for it. And I said, you're outraged because you have no idea that these are things that are already happening to Muslim communities across the country. So when people talk about registering the Muslims, in 2003 when the Immigration Naturalization Services changed over to become the Department of Homeland Security, this was in 2003, the US government started a program called Special Call-in Registration. The acronym was NSEERS, the National Security Exit and Entry Registration System. And what they did was they called on males over the age of 16 who were not US residents, who are here on visas, business visas, visitors visas, other types of immigration statuses that were permanent statuses. And they made a list of 29 countries of origin, all of whom were majority Arab and Muslim countries of origin. People were so scared, they didn't know what that meant. Did that mean that they were gonna round up these men away from their families, where they were gonna put them on camps, where they were gonna detain them? People had no idea what was gonna happen. So about 180,000 Muslim men in this country complied with this program. And about 10% of those law-abiding people, they hadn't done anything wrong, some of them may have overstayed a visa, were deported, were put on deportation proceedings. And the idea of the program was we were trying to find terrorists. We found 0 terrorists from this program, a waste of our taxpayer dollars to criminalize, to target, and to profile our neighbors just based on their national origin or perceived religion. When we talk about the patrolling of Muslim neighborhoods, I'm from New York City, and I come from a community that, based on leaked documents from the New York Police Department, continues to be under unwarranted surveillance. Our religious leaders, our 250 mosques, bookstores and cafes, our Muslim student associations. So when I hear people say that they're outraged and as if that we live in a country where bad things never happened, it really bothers me. It makes me feel like we're not operating from a place of reality. And I understand my history very clearly, that we live in a country that was, for some people, founded on religious freedom, but for others it was founded on the genocide of indigenous people, the slavery of black people, some of whom, about 25%, were Muslims. And we say we won't ban people from coming to this country, in a country where we passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, and in a country where young black men and women can be killed by law enforcement officials, where no one's held accountable. We live in a country where really horrible things have happened. And I ask people to understand that Islamophobia is just another ism on a long list of isms that have directly impacted people in very horrible ways. I think of my own children who are 17, 15, and 12 years old, children who only grew up in a post 9/11 America. They don't know what it feels like to be a Muslim before 9/11. They have no idea. They live in a country that all they know is that someone tells them that they don't belong here, that they're just not enough for this country, that the faith that they follow is the wrong faith. They live in a country that time and time again their faith is labeled suspect. They live in a country where policies are made to criminalize them and target the communities that they love and live in. They live in a country where every time they turn on the primetime television or any news station, they see images of people who don't look like them, who are committing acts of violence, and someone's telling them that those people somehow are connected to them, where their religion, their prophet are vilified everywhere they look. They are living in a time where those vying for the highest office of this land are mulling their future in this country, where our children are uncertain about the place that they were born and raised in, the only country that they ever knew. This is all they know in this country. And these feelings are not new feelings. Muslim children are not the first children in this country to feel this way. And I connect our struggle to the struggle of our Japanese American sisters and brothers who have experienced a form of ism and phobia in much more horrible ways than we have. I remember recently I went to Ohio State University to do a lecture, and there was a question and answer portion, and a young Muslim brother, about 19 years old, stood up in this pretty diverse audience, and he said, "Sister Linda, I have a question to ask you." I said, "Go ahead, brother." He said, "I want to know, who lived in this country at the time of Japanese internment? Who were those Americans that allowed their Japanese neighbors and their children be hauled away to camps in this country? Who were those people? Who lived here?" And I don't know, sisters and brothers, if he was looking for an answer. I think he wanted to ask that question out loud. And when I left there, for days and days after, that question haunted me at night. And I too asked myself, who were those people who allowed that to happen to our American sisters and brothers on this US soil that was created for people to come and experience freedom and democracy? And American Muslim communities are genuinely afraid. Not because we live in a country where we're confident that we're going to be okay, we live in a country where we've seen very bad things happen. The question for me here, when we think about Islamophobia, and I want to take it a step further, that Islamophobia really needs to be called anti-Muslim racism. Because this is not about, I'm not afraid of the individual, Glenn Beck's. I'm not afraid of the individuals on the street who tell me to go back to my country. That's part of the problem. But the bigger problem here is state-sponsored Islamophobia, the institutional, systemic racism against people who are Muslim and those to be perceived Muslim. And let's remember that our Sikh sisters and brothers who are not Muslim are probably more targets in this war against Islam or Muslims in the United States of America. And what has humbled me the most about the experiences of our community is our Sikh sisters and brothers who have never once said we are not Muslim. They have never, in this context, threw us under the bus and said we are not them. They consider themselves our sisters and brothers and those struggling against the racism and isms that are impacting our communities every day. And people say, how do we combat Islamophobia? How do we address Islamophobia? And for me, I think it's important to educate people about Islam, but for me, as an activist, it's more important for me for people to experience Islam. And the way I have tried, and I hope that, that I'm pleasing my Lord in the process, is by allowing people to experience the justice and the compassion of Islam. And that has been in the formation of me and others that are like me, including Imam Zaid Shakir and Dr. Ingrid and many other young people in the Muslim community who are at the forefront of major civil rights movements in this country right now, including Black Lives Matter, including climate justice, including fights against income inequality, and allowing people to experience that the reasons why we stand at those picket lines, the reasons why we are being arrested in civil disobedience is because our religion teaches us to do so. And I want to give you one quick story. In light of the murder of Eric Garner, a brother, a grandfather, a father in Staten Island who was choked by an NYPD police officer, I organized with a group in New York City called the Justice League NYC. It's a group of young people, some of whom are formerly incarcerated individuals, activists and artists and others. And these young people came to us and said, we want to do a march from New York City to Washington, D.C. I said, do you know that New York City is 250 miles away from Washington, D.C.? They said, we don't care. So we want to do something drastic. Maybe somebody will pay attention. So I'm going to make a long story short. I was the co-chair of the march, and we had to sleep every night somewhere, at a church, at a community center. And I hooked up with a mosque in Philadelphia, a beautiful mosque called Al Hidayah Center. And I welcomed these 100 marchers, many of whom were not Muslim. About 95% of them were not Muslim. And we went to this mosque, and the imam came out of the masjid, and he welcomed them in. He said, you know, peace be upon you. We welcome you. This is your home. They fed us. They housed us. They gave us a place to sleep. And about 11 o'clock at night, these young people came to knock on the sister section where we were sleeping. And they said, Sister Linda, where are the people at the mosque? I said, what do you mean? I said, they said, where'd they go? I said, well, it's 11 o'clock at night. They went home probably to sleep with their families. They said, what do you mean? You mean to tell me that these people left some 100 strangers in this beautiful mosque and they just left us here? I said, do you remember what the imam told you when you got here? He said, this is your home. This is a house of God. You are all the creations of God, which means that this is your home. So tonight, while these people are not at this mosque, this house is, or the security of this house is in your hands. The empowerment that these young people felt, some of whom have never set foot in a mosque before, locking the doors, sweeping outside, things that had nothing to do with us, that were there before we got there. And in the morning, about 5:30 in the morning, the imam came back and he started doing the call to prayer that everyone heard on the loudspeakers. The kids came to me again and said, what is that sound? I said, that's a call to prayer. It's time for us, you know, for the Muslims to get up and pray the morning prayer. And this young, maybe 17-year-old young man said, you know, I never heard a sound so beautiful, so moving. I don't even understand what the guy is saying. And anyway, we left the mosque, and these young people were so moved by this experience. The imam never explained to them the 5 pillars of Islam. He never sat them down and lectured them. They experienced love and compassion and these doors that opened at a mosque who told them that you are marching for the right cause, a cause that we support as Muslims. And that for them was enough to understand who and what Muslims were in America. And that for me is my process of what it looks like to combat Islamophobia in this country. And I'll say this, amidst all of these things that I told you today, I still find courage. I find courage in my community. I find courage in my faith. I find courage in allies and sisters and brothers of other faiths. And I sometimes think that the word that we have as Muslims and allies is, and what Tori has is, not only is it courage, it definitely is courage, but it's also audacity. That we are so audacious, that have the audacity to believe that we have the power to make our country the greatest nation on earth, that we have the audacity to believe that we can welcome people here of all faiths, that we are all equal, that we are all deserving of dignity and respect, that we have the audacity to believe that Black lives matter, and that when Black life matters in this country, all of our lives will matter in this country. I have the audacity to believe in our collective power that we can stand up against fascism and nativism and racism and Islamophobia and all the phobias that we know that unfortunately are diseases in our country. And I shared this quote with you yesterday as we think about what it looks like to fight against all this racism and Islamophobia and all these other really horrible things, the sexism and misogyny and patriarchy. I could go on here for another 30 minutes. As again, I leave you with this quote that really is so meaningful to me and how I approach my work in the movement and approach my work in social justice, by an Aboriginal woman in Australia named Leela Watson. And I want everyone to have it around your house and just remember this when you stand up courageously against tyranny and dictatorship and all these other really bad things. And it says, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because you believe that your liberation is bound up with mine, let us work together. I hope that we leave spaces like this united and steadfast and courageous. I hope that we leave here ready to organize like our lives depended on it, because for some of us, our lives do depend on it. Thank you very much.